Hello and welcome everyone. We're a couple minutes early, so I'll give people a minute to get signed on here. Off to a little bit of a rocky start in this new year. Had to reschedule tonight's event. Was hoping to be able to present in person to you all at the Pigeon Head Brewery, but had to reschedule because I have not been feeling so well. So we rescheduled several events already. So I apologize for that. It looks like we've got we can give people some more time to trickle on, but I'm just going to go ahead and get started. So my name is Ned Bohman, the outreach coordinator with Great Basin Bird Observatory and the secretary of the Nevada Bird Records Committee. And tonight I'll be talking to you guys about review species, rare birds that were endorsed in 2022. And I mentioned we had to reschedule several upcoming events, so I'll just run through a couple of the a couple of those that are coming up. On the 21st, I'm doing the first of a multi-installment series about earbirding. This walk will be meeting at the Evans Canyon Trailhead, just north of Rancho San Rafael Park, on Saturday, January 21st. And then the following day is when I've rescheduled the gull seminar for, which was originally scheduled for a few days after that webinar, which at this point was over a month ago. Had to reschedule once for weather and then again recently for illness. So hopefully the weather cooperates for us on the 22nd. We've got a few more presentations coming up as part of this January lecture series. The idea was to have a presentation each Tuesday night, but so far we have not gotten off to a great start for that. Next Tuesday on the 17th will be Blake Barbary presenting about shorebirds. She's the coordinator of that project with Point Blue Conservation Science, and she's going to be talking to us about a 30-year perspective on shorebird populations throughout the Intermountain West. So I'm looking forward to that one. And then the very next day on the 18th is when we've rescheduled the second presentation for Maddie Lohman, with a researcher at UNR. Is going to present about water birds and how changing landscapes influences duck survival. So you can join us all in person in Reno at the Pigeon Head Brewery on the 18th at 6 p.m. for that event. And lastly, I want to introduce a course put together by a colleague of ours, Robin Eppert at the Western Nevada College in Carson City. They're putting together an introduction to ornithology course, and they're looking for folks to sign up. I believe the course starts at the end of the month, and you can find more information about that on our social media and on our website. We've got contact information for Robin if you're interested in the Intro to Ornithology course at the Western Nevada College in Carson City. But without further ado, we'll get into tonight's program, and I'll put on my record committee secretary hat and talk to you all about the birds that we saw this year. So hopefully you can all see my screen. All right. So we have the state checklist and the state review list, both of which are curated by the NBRC, the Nevada Bird Records Committee. And this evening, I'm going to talk to you guys about those records which we endorsed this year. But before I go into that, I'll just remind you guys of what we are and how it works. It's a volunteer body of which I am the secretary, and I have 5 voting members listed below: Paul Hurtado, Ben Zyla, Alex Harper, Justin Strait, and Frank Fogarty. All put in a lot of hard work voting on these records, and we really appreciate them. When a species on the Nevada State Review List is reported, we kindly ask folks to submit their documentation to us, and we vote on them in hopefully a timely fashion. And so this list of species was endorsed in 2022. Those with the number 2 after them had multiple records, multiple submissions of. I believe of these, the Nelson sparrow was a state first. And a few of them did result in removals from the review list because we've got our 5th record in 10 years. So we review all species for which we do not have 5 records in the preceding 10 years. So as we get to them, I'll mention them in the show. But for those species which we did receive the 5th record of in 10 years, we removed them from the review list and are no longer seeking submissions for those species. First up endorsed this year was a ruff. This was the 7th Nevada record seen at the Pyramid Lake Delta by only a few observers, but they did manage to get photographs and great description of the bird. Ruff is a shorebird that breeds in the Palearctic, the Old World, and typically winters in the Old World as well. When they do show up in the US, they tend to be coastal, so inland records of ruff are always exciting. Not many birders were able to see the ruff, but fortunately a pair of red knots were found at the Delta, and so those of us who went out to chase the ruff had a little bit of a consolation prize and got to see some red knots. The photo of the bird on the left is a displaying male, so this is unique among shorebirds, is this lecking behavior, which is typically seen in grouse species are noted for it mostly, but the males will competitively display in a group setting, and they will display for mates, and sometimes on stopover sites during migration, they will also do this lecking display, but it typically occurs on their far northern Old World Arctic breeding grounds. Next up, we had 2 records of thick-billed longspur, the 6th and 7th Nevada record. One was from Miller's Rest area just outside of Tonopah. The other was from Amargosa Valley, found by Daniel Mitev, and the bird at Miller's was found by Paul and Alex Linton. This is the former McCown's longspur. Some of you may know it by that previous name. It is now called the thick-billed longspur. They breed in the northern Great Plains and they winter in the southern Great Plains and a little bit into Mexico. And some years we see more than others here in Nevada. Both of these were last fall, and this year there were no reports. We had our 14th Mississippi kite, which I believe was a pending record during the last presentation I gave about this topic, and kind of a funny story about Chris Aquila finding it, seeing it while driving, and screeching to a stop on the side of the road, jumping out of his vehicle with his camera, presumably while greatly upsetting other drivers who were presumably shouting obscenities at him, holding up traffic to photograph this bird. But nonetheless, he photographed this Mississippi kite flying right over Henderson, over Cornerstone Park. This was our 5th record in 10 years, so we removed it from the review list, and we are no longer seeking documentation of this species that typically occurs in the southeastern US, though they do wander, as a lot of raptors do. They overshoot their traditional breeding and migrating areas, and there is a small population breeding in Arizona. So some birds do head this way. Another species that we have removed from the review list was the Canada warbler. We also had 2 submissions for Canada warbler. On the left, a bird that the Gaffies found at Cactus Springs, and on the right, a bird found in Beatty by Emmett Iverson. Emmett's bird was the 5th record in 10 years, the 11th Nevada record, and as such, we removed it from the review list, which doesn't leave us very many eastern warblers left on our review list. You can see the full review list online on our website, gbbo.org/NBRC, but I believe there's less than 10 eastern species of warbler left on that list. We had another tropical kingbird endorsed, which is kind of surprising given how many show up in California on the coast. This is only our 4th endorsed record for the state. but I think a lot of that has to do with the difficulty in confirming silent birds. This species looks remarkably similar to the Couch's kingbird. There are a few field marks that birders can use to separate them. The bill length and the tail notch are a few of them, but are mostly just suggestive and very hard to confirm without an actual recording or at least a description of the vocalization. Unfortunately, this bird was vocal for committee member Ben Zyla, who was able to get these photos, as well as a great description of a twittering vocalization, which would separate it from the distinct vocalizations of Couch's kingbird. Say species with a tropical distribution from Mexico to South America, and they have a strong tendency for vagrancy. There's records for these guys up and down both coasts and from many, many United States out of range. We had our state record Nelson sparrow, which was another expected species. If you look at the records on eBird that show up in California, you get a feel for what ought to show up here in Nevada. You figure these birds are piling up on the coast and they breed in the Great Plains. They're obviously crossing Nevada, just a matter of someone connecting with one. And fortunately for us, Eric Heisey did connect with this bird at Lake Mead down in Las Vegas. Photographed by a few individuals, and I don't think the bird stuck around for all that long. So they're an eastern species with kind of a weird breeding distribution, and they winter along the Gulf Coast and the Atlantic coast, and they breed up in Canada along the coast, and then in the northern Great Plains as well. There's a subspecies that breeds. And interestingly enough, right before this sighting, there was a bird reported in North Lake Tahoe, not too far from our Northern Nevada birding hub in Reno. Last winter, we were part of the rufous-backed robin invasion. They showed up all over the place, including a first record in Colorado. But these birds were Nevada's third and fourth, and one stuck around for a rather long time. The other one likely did not stick around as long, but was in a little bit more of a remote location, so we don't necessarily have as great of a feel for that. However, the first bird was at Corn Creek, and it was reported, well, I guess I didn't list it. It was reported all winter long. It was found in November, and I think it was reported into March. But this is primarily a Mexican species, infrequently Arizona and Texas. We did have a few reports earlier, well, I guess late last year, along the Colorado River in Arizona at Willow Beach. So it sort of remains to be seen if this is going to be another year in which we see a lot of rufous-backed robins. There was something unique about last year. If this is a trend, we'll start seeing more of, but definitely a species to keep your eye out for in southern Nevada, hanging out with those more familiar American robins. We also had our state's fifth record of winter wren. This bird was found at the Clark County Wetlands Park by committee member Ben Zyla, who actually did find two birds, and they spent most of the winter at the Wetlands Park. They were found in November, and there are eBird records until March 8th. So this is a species that is remarkably similar to Pacific wren, and was semi-distantly split from them. And when I say that, they used to be considered the same species as Pacific wren, and DNA techniques revealed that they were actually two distinct species with eastern and western populations. There are subtle differences in appearance. The differences in vocalization might be more distinct, but are also fairly subtle and require a good ear to pick out. I don't actually have a recording of this bird, but I do have this comparison slide to show the very similar Pacific wren to the winter wren. You'll notice the winter wren has a bit more pale coloring on the throat, and that's typically what you are looking for when you're trying to visually separate these birds. But you need great lighting, and these birds are not the most cooperative birds, so this is not always easy to see. So kudos to those observers for getting these good photos that were able to separate from the very similar Pacific Rim. We had a pair of hepatic tanagers show up in the Virgin Mountains down in southern Nevada, which is interesting given how close this species occurs to us in northern Arizona. This is sort of one of the northernmost Sky Island breeders in those high elevation pine forests that are associated with Arizona and the Sonoran Desert. We do have a bit of that habitat in southern Nevada, most notably in the Spring Mountains, but also the Sheep Range and the Virgin Mountains, where these birds were found, which is just north of the Arizona state line. These were found by Corey Lange, who initially found one bird, I believe, and I think Justin Straight went to follow up on it and found the second individual. I may be mistaken on that, but Justin at least photographed the birds and was able to confirm there were two. However, he was unable to confirm any sort of breeding evidence, which is likely what these birds were up to, but hard to say with confidence. It's a bird with a pretty large distribution. The northernmost breeders are in Colorado and the southernmost are in Argentina. And so it spans a good distance, but we're sort of at the northern limit for this species here in Nevada. And these birds were our fourth state record. This is another eastern species of warbler that was removed from our review list. This was found by committee member Alex Harper at the Henderson Bird Viewing Preserve. It's the 10th Nevada record and the 5th record in 10 years, so it is no longer a species for which we are seeking documentation. This bird was a sort of cryptic female type where if you didn't get a good look at the bird's underparts or were looking quickly, you could be forgiven for thinking it was an orange-crowned warbler. But you see those fine streaks as well as a bit of that face pattern, and you know you've got something different here. So good job, Alex, for getting these great photos. This is a species that breeds in the northeastern US and Canada and winters almost exclusively in the Caribbean. And this is sort of your classic case of warbler vagrancy, where they travel the right distance but the wrong direction. So this bird showed up in mid-November in Nevada, presumably on its intended path to the Caribbean, and it landed in Florida at a launching off point where it could have headed south to the Caribbean, or it could have headed the opposite direction, and that's what it did. And it landed here in Nevada. And so you'll see that pattern with a lot of species, that mid-November is a great time to look for vagrant warblers and other songbirds in the southwestern US. This species was sort of part of a trend range expansion going on with these guys. They've been steadily spreading westward. We had so this is Nevada's second and third record of a barred owl, both northern Nevada, Fly Ranch north of Reno, and New Washoe City just south of Reno. And so they're typically an East Coast forest interior species, non-migratory, but they've been expanding their range westward since the 80s. They were first confirmed to be breeding in the northern Sierra Nevada in the 1990s. And that's when some of these conservation issues with the spotted owl were brought to light. So what happens is the barred owls are actually they're out competing the spotted owls in their native habitat. They're able to, and they're actually predating spotted owls in some cases. So I don't want to go into the weeds on spotted owl and barred owl dynamics too much, but there is a conservation situation there. And in some places, the state and federal government is actually looking into lethal control to help out our spotted owls who are facing threats from a lot of angles in terms of forest development, logging, pressure from barred owl, others as well. So this bird I photographed at the Fly Ranch north of Reno, and then my next slide here. There we go. This is just a photo to compare the similar and more expected California spotted owl, the California subspecies of the spotted owl. So the bird on the right was photographed by Joe Tuvell in New Washoe City. The bird on the left is from the Macaulay Library, and you can see how the breast pattern differs between these two birds, but otherwise are very similar looking with those hollow black eyes, large chunky body shape, and brown overall plumage. But so the spotted owl is much more expected in our area, though still, mind you, very uncommon. However, we are potentially seeing more and more barred owls, and I strongly suspect these are not the last ones that Nevada will see. This was a fun bird. A gyr falcon was, a large falcon was seen on the Christmas bird count and was unable to be confirmed until a few days later. It was not exactly the most cooperative bird. The photo on the lower right there isn't to pick on Paul, but it's sort of that's what my photos looked like too. That's what most people's photos looked like. Joe got very lucky when this bird flew right over him, and he got these amazing shots of this one in the previous slide as well. But this was Nevada's third record. The first and second record were actually the same bird about 10 years ago, returned 2 winters in a row to Carson Lake in Fallon, Central Nevada. But these guys are a resident of the far, far northern Arctic tundra, but they're powerful flyers, and juveniles will disperse great distances. And so there's scattered records throughout the US of these guys showing up. But this guy stuck around and entertained Reno birders for a few months. It was at least 2 or 3 months it stuck around for. Never really allowing for better photos than the one you see there on the bottom. Next up, we had a Eurasian green-winged teal, which was not photographed, but a very compelling written description was provided. It's a pretty straightforward ID. The bird on the top photo is your standard American green-winged teal with that vertical white bar. On the bottom is your standard Eurasian green-winged teal with the horizontal white bar. So pretty easy to tell apart, and with note of that field mark, that description was pretty easy to endorse. However, if you dig a little deeper, you will see that these birds do hybridize, and hybrids can show marks of either subspecies, such as this bird here, showing both the vertical and horizontal white bar, which is a good indication you are looking at a hybrid bird. But this was Nevada's 5th record, found by Bill Grossi at the Lahontan Rec area, which is a good place to look for fun ducks in the wintertime here in northern Nevada. We had our 2nd record of yellow-footed gull. This bird was first photographed at the Las Vegas Wash, and birders were alerted to the fact that something weird was up from the photos. And then a bunch of birders went out and refound it at Lake Mead, I think a week or more after it was first photographed, and eventually confirmed it to be the same bird that had been spending time at Lake Havasu. And I think this bird ultimately went back there as well. Not 100% sure about that, but it did stick around Lake Mead for a while, at least March through September, where birders got to sort of document the progression of its molt, which was kind of cool. But this species is endemic to the Sea of Cortez, the Gulf of California, in between Baja California and Sonora, Mexico. They exclusively breed there, although they regularly wander and show up at the Salton Sea. But this was only Nevada's 2nd record. So I mentioned the progression of molt. You can, not the best lighting, but the bottom photograph was taken in March, the upper photograph taken in September. And then you can maybe see that a little better on this slide with the spread wing shot from March, and then that really advanced gray flight feather and back feather plumage coming in by September. We had our third record of black turnstone, which were not cooperative birds. Not a lot of folks were lucky enough to see these, but these were found at Swan Lake by Ray Brunn and Clayton Peoples. Two birds, you can see in the bottom photo, there are definitely two of them. They have a pretty coastal distribution, and they don't typically wander inland. We don't really see them away from the coast. Even ruddy turnstone is slightly more expected, but pretty uncommon away from the coast here in Nevada. So, but with these photos, unmistakable plumage. It's similar in structure if you had poor light to a ruddy turnstone, but these are without a doubt black turnstone. And I think they were only at Swan Lake for a day. So nice work, Clayton and Ray. We had a very obliging Pomeranian Jaeger at the Sparks Marina last spring. I think it was about a month it stuck around for. This was another Clayton Peoples find. This was the third Nevada record of another pelagic species, not even coastal. This is just, you don't see these guys inland. You're lucky if you see them anything other than from the back of a boat bouncing around, trying to determine if you got a good enough look at the tail shape or black patch on the breast to make out what species it was. But this was a very cooperative bird, able to be seen from flat ground. Great photos. Everyone got great photos of those diagnostic tail feathers to prove that it is in fact Pomeranian Jaeger. There's a couple other Jaeger species that were debated at first, but it actually stuck around, and these tail feathers grew in a little bit after its first appearance. So little doubt remained after the initial sighting. And then some cool photos that Martin got with the legend sign in the background there, the iconic Reno birding destination of Sparks Marina. We had our state's third record of eastern wood pewee. I actually found this bird while I was deployed for surveys in southern Nevada. I was actually looking for some shade and some cell reception to get on a scheduled Zoom meeting. So I was parked in the shade, and I heard a pewee call from when I was parked inside my vehicle, and I couldn't chase it down because I had to be on a meeting. But fortunately, the bird didn't go anywhere because it was hot in the middle of the day in May. And after my meeting, I was able to chase the thing down and record it calling and take some crappy photos. I don't know if this will work. This is what it sounds like. Well, that's even quiet for me. I don't know if you guys hear that at all. Well, maybe you could hear that, and maybe you couldn't. Thank you. Here, make it stop. Anyway, they have this very clear whistled pewee call that is very different from the similar looking western wood pewee. But that call is unlike anything the western wood pewee makes. And that's probably just going to play till I change to the next slide. Anyway, there are some visual field marks that you can use to separate these two species, though they are all suggestive and can point to an ID. Really, the ideal is to have a recording or at least a description of the diagnostic localization. But there's a little bit of material suggesting that you can make this identification based on a combination of features, including the bill color, throat color, the posture the bird is perching at when relaxed, the wing bars, as well as the tail projection. I'm going to change slides so that this recording will stop playing. We can talk more about pewee ID later if folks have questions. Okay, I apologize for that. Couldn't make that recording stop playing. Okay. We had our state's sixth record of reddish egret show up. We had one last year stick around. Was it last year or 2 years ago? And in the recent past, we had one stick around for a while down in southern Nevada. This bird, I don't think stuck around quite as long, but still stuck around enough for a good number of folks to see it. This was found at Lake Mead by David Anderson, and another species we believe followed the Colorado River up from the Sea of Cortez. Sort of a pattern that we're seeing a lot of species that occur down there show up in Las Vegas. This year we had least tern, we had this bird, the reddish egret, the yellow-footed gull. We had this next bird, the tricolored heron, same thing following that. We had a magnificent frigate bird a couple years ago. There was a brown pelican earlier this year. All of these are species that are found in the Sea of Cortez as breeders. And then all of the birds that showed up in Nevada were juveniles of these species. So presumably were juveniles dispersing not necessarily the right way. And so we had our second record of tricolored heron, and this is a juvenile, as well as that reddish egret was, as you can see from all the extensive rufous coloring on this bird. This was found at the Henderson Bird Viewing Preserve by Charles Ritter. The first Nevada record was before eBird, over 30 years ago. Also, I think it was Lake Mead. I can't remember offhand. I should. But it's got a similar distribution and pattern occurrence to reddish egret, as I mentioned, juvie potentially dispersing up the Colorado River. But this guy stuck around for a long time and was mostly cooperative. It took me a couple tries to see it, but I did ultimately get to see the bird. So it was hiding for people sometimes, and sometimes it was just sitting right out in the open for them. But I think it stuck around at the bird preserve for over a month. And we also had our state's 5th record of laughing gull. This was found also at the Sparks Marina, the iconic Northern Nevada birding destination. This was found during the Western Field Ornithologist Conference by some visiting conference attendees, some young folks. They were teenagers, I think, that found this bird. But I was notified of it at the conference, and I may or may not have ran quickly to go see it during the conference and came back. But it's an abundant gull on the East Coast. It's a parking lot gull in a lot of places. But out here, that is not the story. It's similar in appearance to our more expected Franklin's gull, which both are sharp-looking birds as adults. This is kind of a worn-looking juvenile, sort of molting into its first winter plumage, and not necessarily looking so well in that shot. But the bird stuck around for a few days, presumably did all right, got itself together, and got out of Nevada. And so that was it for the species that we endorsed this year. I didn't mention at the beginning of my presentation, but as I've been making a tradition, the second part of this presentation is a bird quiz. So I have some photos to go through, and this part might be tricky since I don't actually have a host, but we'll see what we can do. Before the bird quiz, I guess I should mention that another little fun thing I had been doing with this presentation, actually before I was even involved with the records committee, was I asked them what they thought their next state bird would be. And one year, Gene Tinsman actually picked the Hutton's vireo, and that was the year that it showed up. So I took that off of there and I updated it to her previous pick, which I think was black vulture. But in any event, these are species that our records committee folks think are likely to show up next. Black-headed gull is an honorable mention because it wasn't suggested by our records committee folk. It was suggested by other record committee folk and my coworker Lauren Harder, who was amazed to learn that Nevada did not have a black-headed gull record. So that's what's on the radar from our reviewers. And now we'll try this bird quiz thing. If I can successfully manage let's see. So if folks want to type into the Q&A I think that will be the easiest way for me to show you the pictures as well as do the quiz. So this is our first bird. And if anyone has a guess, type it into the Q&A box and I will let you know. Or if no one wants to guess, I will give it 30 seconds and I will tell you guys why this bird is what I have identified it as. Well, it seems like nobody wants to guess. This is a western wood pewee. I thought I was throwing a bone for the first one. Admittedly, flycatchers are cryptic and difficult, objectively a little brown bird to the untrained eye. But you can see that this bird is a flycatcher from the structure of its bill. The coloring can rule out an Empidonax flycatcher, which it may look most similar to. The pewee has less contrasting wing bars, duskier underparts, and a longer primary projection because they are a longer distance migrant. All right, next. Maybe I can entice someone to guess a shorebird. Yeah, we have a guess from anonymous attendee, Western Sandpiper, and that is indeed correct. You can see this bird still has its breeding plumage with those rusty rufous braces on its back and the slightly drooping bill typical of a Western Sandpiper. Okay, next. How about a gull? Come on, I'm throwing you guys all the bones. That was sarcasm. I did not intentionally to pick the three of the most cryptic taxa to begin the quiz with, but I think they're fun. Let's see if we can get a guess. Admittedly, this is not the most straightforward ID either, so I'll give another couple seconds. We have a guess for laughing gull, which it is not. Laughing gull is going to be a much slimmer bird. The bill is really useful to separate them. Laughing gulls are sort of in this black-headed gull group, and they have long, slim bills. And this bird has a rather robust bill. So this is a slaty-backed gull, subadult, looking kind of like a western gull, which you can rule out by the eye color. Western gull does have variable eye color, but will not typically be this startlingly pale. So this is a subadult slaty-backed gull with those very dark charcoal gray mantle feathers coming in. You can see a bit of that characteristic secondary skirt as well, the broad strip of white feathers there. So that is a slaty-backed gull, of which we only have one record in Nevada. So that's why I put it on there. Next up is a warbler. Anonymous attendee suggests this is a Mack warbler, and by that they mean McGillivrary's warbler, which it is. This bird has very bold, broken eye ring, eye arcs, if you will, which is very characteristic of the species. The pale throat is not characteristic of this species. This is a weird-looking individual, and it is not all that easy to find photos of McGillivrary's warblers with such pale throats in the Macaulay Library. But they do exist, and this is one. Next one. This is a black vulture. Yes, anonymous attendee, you are correct. This bird can look similar to a juvenile turkey vulture, but a juvenile turkey vulture will have a feathered neck. Black vulture has a naked neck. And just because I see in the questions here, Joe, you are late. We did cover the records. At 6 I started, and so I'm midway through our quiz right now. But it is being recorded, so you can catch up and watch it on YouTube later. So sorry about that, Joe. Our next bird, oh, whoa, that's one way to do it. Okay, our next bird. Yes, anonymous attendee and Joe are correct. This is a Philadelphia vireo. They can look similar to warbling vireos, but will have much more yellow, specifically concentrated around the throat and also around the vent. Whereas on the potentially similar warbling vireo, the yellow is concentrated along the flanks and is more diffuse throughout the underparts. The lower color is also useful. That is the area between the bird's bill and eye. This area is typically pale on a warbling vireo and has the dark line extending through it on this, like on this Philadelphia vireo, which can impart a certain blank staring look to the warbling vireo and maybe a more focused stare on the Philadelphia vireo. But anyways, dark lore on the Philly, pale lore on the warbling most of the time. Next bird. Anonymous attendee says semi-palmated sandpiper, and that is correct. This bird can look similar to other sandpipers. If you are sure you are getting a good read on the leg color, they will be black. If you are sure they are not just yellow legs covered in mud, would advise against using leg color for this ID. I like to look at the bill. This is a relatively straight, stubby, stout-based bill on this bird. Doesn't droop like the Western sandpiper does. There is a bit of variation in bill size between the sexes of our sandpipers. So within a given species, you can see some variation in bill length, but typically semi-palmateds have shorter, straighter bills than Westerns. And additionally, because this bird still has some breeding plumage, you don't see those rusty red braces like Westerns show. Instead, just that nice, warm, plain brown color. This is a semi-palmated sandpiper. Admittedly, this is maybe not the best photo, but I think it conveys the intent. We have a guess for golden eagle. This is actually a bald eagle. Not the best lighting. You can tell from there's more white modeling on this bird. Not actually seeing the field marks very well. There's more white modeling on the underside of these wings. It's sort of shaded, but on the wing that's more above the bird, you can see that pretty well. And then you've got the white patch on the tail doesn't necessarily help separate from golden, because they can both show that. But this bird is actually a bald eagle. It would be soaring on flat wings, which would also be a useful cue in the field, whereas a golden eagle would soar with a slight dihedral. And this is our next bird. Didn't get anyone to guess the first flycatcher. Maybe we can get some guesses on this one. Anonymous attendee suggests Hammonds. Joe T suggests Acadian. This is a Hammond's fly. A nice short bill that is a little light on the light side for this species. A slight crested appearance is good for Hammonds, and the primary projection, which is not always easy to get a good read on, but that will help separate from the similar appearing dusky flycatcher. So Hammond's typically has a longer primary projection, which I don't know if you can see my cursor, but these feathers relative to the rest of the folded wing are the primaries, and they often impart a short-tailed look because of how far they stick out. This bird isn't really sitting in a great posture to show that, which maybe points at why it's not always the best field mark to use. By far and away, the best field marks for these birds are the vocalizations. Silent birds are incredibly difficult to identify, but you can at least tell from the structure that it's not a peewee, which is what I wanted to get at by comparing that with our first quiz bird of that peewee, if you guys remember, with that really strong crested appearance, the long wings relative to the tail, and then this guy, bolder wing bars, more contrasty wings relative to the back and the underparts, as well as that shorter wing relative to tail length compared to a peewee. All right, next bird, another warbler. Another Mac, suggested by anonymous attendee. So this bird is actually a mourning warbler. It's got a thinner eye ring, which this species does not show an eye ring as an adult at all. No eye ring. However, the immature birds typically do show very thin eye rings that are often broken either at the front or rear. And in this case, it looks like this is a mostly complete ring, broken in the front and potentially broken a little bit in the rear, but much thinner than a McGillivray's would show. The pale throat, which I mentioned before on the McGillivray's, is sort of an outlier on McGillivray's. Pale throat is typically going to suggest something else, and pale throat is a common field mark on young mourning warblers. And furthermore, the structure of the bird, if you look at the undertail coverts, it can suggest a look that the tail is maybe not as long as the McGillivray's, because on a mourning warbler, you have longer undertail coverts with relatively similar length tail feathers. So it can look as though the bird has a shorter tail. Our next bird. I swear I did not intend to go so heavy with the cryptic taxa here. We have a juvenile sparrow, which is everybody's favorite critter to look at here. The literal little brown bird. This is a juvenile song sparrow that I photographed in Washington State. The song sparrow has some of the most extensive geographic variation of any of our songbirds, and they do look very dark like this up in the Pacific Northwest. The adults do have a bit more pattern than this. This is a juvenile, which, because the bird's overall plumage is so dark, the pattern seems a bit more washed out. Our next bird. Joe Tuvel suggests these are California condor, and he is correct. You can see the flesh-colored head, that white patch on the underwing, as well as those splayed out fingers. Furthermore, this is going to be a massive, massive, massive bird. You will not likely mistake this for any other species unless it is incredibly far away and you can't get a good feel for size. As anonymous attendee suggests, the impression could be more like a large flying dinosaur. These birds are definitely flying over Nevada. They're breeding so close in Utah. They're such powerful flyers that cover great distances. They must be in Nevada, but we have yet to definitively document that. So thus my condor quiz photos. And next up, we don't have any guesses. Joe T suggesting Nashville. Would not be Nashville with the yellow throat. This is a common yellow throat. Not going to have as bold of an eye ring as a Nashville, and that contrasty yellow throat on the female, skulking behavior, and the call notes that the bird was giving. This is a species that behavioral cues are huge in the IV. This bird would just not be acting the same way as a Nashville in the field. If you had the behavior to go by, that's not a likely confusion species. But taken out of context and not in the best angle, I can definitely see the confusion. But Nashville's not going to have that yellow throat, and it's going to have much bolder eye ring. Almost feel the need to apologize to you guys. Got another juvenile sparrow for you. Anonymous attendee suggests chipping sparrow, and they are correct. This is indeed a chipping sparrow. Structure suggests a Spizella type sparrow, so a brewer's clay-colored chipping type thing. Because it's migrating, we don't typically have, and I know that because I photographed the bird, you wouldn't know that otherwise, but brewer sparrows do not migrate in their juvenile plumage, so a migrating streaky-breasted sparrow is most likely to be a chipping sparrow. But also, and the lighting in this photo is not the best to show it, but it's got a pretty defined line extending behind the eye, as well as a fairly well-defined cap, which would separate it from the similar looking brewers. And someone is suggesting Lincolns, and I can see where you get that with the fine, crisp streaking on the breast like that. But Lincolns have very, very obvious buff coloring at the sort of malar below the bill, at the base of the bill, and extending into the flanks. Those crisp streaks are always over a buffy colored background, and that actually stands out pretty strongly from most every Lincoln sparrow I've seen. That buffy color is very, very bold in them. As well as the overall structure of the bird. Lincolns are maybe a little more compact body, shorter winged, longer tailed. So yes, this is a chipping sparrow, juvenile. Another gull. Objectively speaking, I would argue this one's not so hard, but see what we've got. Joe suggests glaucous wing, and anonymous attendees suggest super duper hybrid. This is a glaucous wing. At least I feel okay calling this a glaucous wing, and it was labeled glaucous wing in the Macaulay Library. It's got this muddy pattern overall, which rules out the similar Thayers or Iceland types. A little bit dark for glaucous, and obviously glaucous at that age would have the very strong bicolored bill. The bill proportions are pretty solid for glaucous wing, straight-sided but large. It doesn't have that bulbous tip like a hybrid might suggest. In short, I'm not necessarily seeing features that conflict, which you often see on hybrids. But it's a valid point that an anonymous attendee brings up, that hybrid gulls are more common than most people think, depending on where you are. And glaucous wing is frequently involved in hybrid taxa. But from what I can see, this looks like a pretty standard first cycle glaucous wing with the all dark bill, muddy upper parts, primary tips even toned with the rest of the body. Next bird. Joe Tuvel suggests Hutton's vireo, and anonymous attendee remarks that it has gorgeous blue feet, which are both true statements. This is a Hutton's vireo. It can look similar to ruby-crowned kinglet, but the blue feet are a very good field mark for all vireos, are going to have these blue-gray feet. You need to get a pretty good look at the bird to see that. So it's not necessarily the best field mark to memorize and hang your ID on, but it is nonetheless a feature that separates them from the similar ruby-crowned kinglet. A good one I like to separate them from ruby crowns is the black bar below the lower wing bar. Again, I'm not sure if you can see my cursor, but the lower wing bar on a ruby-crowned kinglet is frequently bordered by bold black below it. The eye ring is also useful. This vireo has sort of a spectacled look where this white patch goes from the front of the eye over the top of the bill and connects with the pattern on the other side of the face, whereas ruby-crowned kinglet typically just has these weird teardrop-shaped eye rings that don't connect over the front of the bill. Speaking of the bill is probably the best way to separate them. This is a vireo, and it has the finely hooked tip bill of all vireos, not the thin, dainty bill of a ruby-crowned kinglet. Next up. So this bird does have a bit of a bill deformity going on. It is not what the bill is supposed to look like. This is most likely a result of avian keratin disorder that I think was first described in Alaska, but causes the bill to keep on growing like this. You can find photos of nuthatches with bills that look like hummingbirds on eBird. And so this is, as Joe suggests, a warbling vireo. It's not actually missing a mandible. Its upper mandible has just grown so far out and crossed the lower mandible. So that lower mandible, again, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but we've got a lower mandible and then we've got an upper mandible that actually sticks down. So the lower mandible is kind of pointing up right in front of the eye and much smaller than the upper mandible. But I wanted to show this bird because of the yellow wash underneath. This is the eastern subspecies of warbling vireo, which has a pretty solid yellow tone to the underparts, which to a lot of Western observers can suggest Philadelphia vireo. But if you look at the strength of the yellow and its distribution, it is not strongly concentrated as a spot under the throat, excuse me, like the previous bird. And also wanted to comment on overall structure of the bird. The head shape, Philadelphia vireo is more warbler-like overall. They're more compact. They have a more rounded head shape. They have a slightly smaller bill. And these are certainly subtle features that are by no means silver bullet field marks to hang your ID on. They are things, observations about the bird that suggest its general feel. But you can also see that this bird does have pale lores, maybe a hint of that line extending, but not quite like the Philadelphia vireo from several slides ago. Next bird. Anonymous attendee suggests bald, and I suspect they mean bald eagle, which it is. You can see the very, very large bill relative to the head. That pattern, that white pattern on the broad wings is good for bald eagle. Immature Goldens are never going to show that white pattern like that. And so, yes, that is a bald eagle. And this is our last quiz bird, so why not finish strong with a gull? Anonymous attendee suggests Iceland gull, which is what this bird is, specifically a Kumlin's Iceland gull. I photographed this bird in Connecticut recently, and they typically only get a Kumlin's subspecies. The nominate subspecies is not known from Connecticut, not known from a lot of parts in the US. So this is a whole complicated mess of attacks that we don't need to get into the weeds with, but long and short is this is an Iceland gull of a specific subspecies, uniquely identified by the gray primary tips. All right, well, that concludes the program for tonight. Don't have any more quiz birds for you guys. If anyone has any questions or would like to see any photos again, or has any questions about the review species that we endorsed, I'm happy to go back and answer any questions you might have. So I will give folks a little bit. And I appreciate your guys' participation in the quiz. It would have been less fun if nobody wanted to play. Anonymous attendee wants to know where the best place to look for a condor in Nevada is. And I don't know that I have a specific place that I would recommend other than Lake Mead, Southern Nevada, high vantages, somewhere with a scope. You're most likely to see one flying over, kind of wandering. There's not necessarily any known nesting areas super close or any reason it would be at any one specific spot. But I think high overlooks on the eastern edge of the state there, getting closer towards Zion. Joe Tuvel suggests Virgin River Valley, yeah, eastern Nevada with high vantages, canyony habitat. So I would think high locations in southeast Nevada. Pretty much get yourself as close as you can to Zion on an overlook and hope. But every once in a while you get folks reporting condors on eBird that this massive bird showed up right in front of their face, and it's almost always a turkey vulture that someone got a sudden view of, which when seen at close range and excited, I can certainly understand the confusion, but that's typically the scenario. Well, if there are no more questions, I am going to go ahead and sign off. But thanks everyone for tuning in this evening. And I appreciate everyone's flexibility and understanding as we've had to reschedule events due to weather and illness. And looking at the forecast, I don't necessarily see a change in that. So stay tuned for future announcements regarding the scheduling of our events, and hopefully we can get everything off without a hitch. So thanks for tuning in this evening, everyone, and I hope everyone has a good night.